Welcome back to another episode of Revealing Biblical Truths. In today's video, we will be discussing the Book of Esther and the story of Purim. Before we get started, go ahead and like, share, subscribe, click the notification bell, and comment down below on your insights on this video. Now regarding the Book of Esther, it would have to be dated somewhere between 460 BC and 330 BC. 460 BC would be right before Ezra's return to Jerusalem, based on chapter 8, verse 12. Internal evidence also suggests that the Feast of Purim had been observed for some time prior to the actual writing of the book, based on chapter 9, verse 19, and that Xerxes had already died, based on chapter 10, verse 2. Several scholars have dated the book later than 330 BC, but the absence of Greek words and the style of the author's Hebrew dialect, however, suggests that the book must have been written before the Persian Empire fell to Greece in 331. Now let's actually go through the text and talk about some things that I found. In chapter 1, verse 1, it says Mordecai had a vision on the first day of Nisan. Well, this is the Babylonian name for Aviv, the first day of the new year, 14 days before Passover. And it says that Mordecai was one of the tribes of Benjamin. We see that these descendants also appear in 1 Chronicles chapter 8. In chapter 2, we see that Esther was the first cousin of Mordecai and was adopted because her parents had died. He married her, but the king wanted to marry her, and she went in with him in the month of Adar in the 12th month. Haman had found out that Mordecai was a Yehudi and sought to kill him and all the Yehudim because they wouldn't bow to the king. Haman bribed the king 10,000 talents of silver to kill them. That's reminiscent of Yehuda's betrayal of Yahusha for the silver. In chapter 4, verse 1, it says that Mordecai put on sackcloth and ashes. This is a typical way that his people would mourn. The people everywhere did the same thing. And when Esther heard it, she told them all to fast for 3 days and pray to Yah. Even Queen Esther took off her royal garments and put on sackcloth and ashes. She went to the king, and he had an angry countenance. But Yah changed his heart. She fainted twice, and he embraced her and asked what he could do for her. I can't help but notice that there are some parallels here between Yahusha and Passover in this story. This was at the same time of the year, around Passover, and he was in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights, and then all of Israel fasted and prayed for 3 days and 3 nights. She fainted and looked dead, and he was dead, and they were both raised up on the 3rd day. She requested to have a party and bring Mordecai and Haman both there. Haman saw Mordecai and he was angry. His wife suggested making a gallows 50 cubits high on which to hang Mordecai. Also note that this is the same height as Noah's Ark, 50 cubits. I don't know if there's any significance there, but I just thought it was cool. Well, that night Yah disturbed his sleep, and he had several of his servants read records to him. In that time he remembered the good deed that Mordecai had done for him. He saw Haman in the court, and Haman talked to him. The king asked Haman what he should do for the person who was good to him, and he honored. Well, Haman thought he was talking about himself. So he said he should be given a robe and a horse. This is also prophetic, as all the ones who will be saved are given a white robe, just as it also says in reference to Samuel, who was brought up by the witch of Endor on the command of King Saul. It says he was wearing a robe. The king agreed and ordered Haman to put on a robe to Mordecai and a horse to ride. He went home mourning. The next day at the banquet, also symbolic of the marriage supper of the Lamb, Esther told the king that the plot against her and her people. He asked who it was, and she said Haman. She called him the adversary, which is synonymous with Hasatan. Looking at the story, one can notice the parallels to the woman being the holy city, the bride of the king, and the people being Israel, and the adversary attempting to kill the people of Yah. The king left, and Haman pleaded with Esther. He actually fell on the bed, and when the king walked in, he thought Haman was trying to get with Esther in a biblical way. Then one of the guards told the king about the gallows that Haman set up, so the king hanged Haman on the gallows instead. In chapter 8, verse 1, it says, "In that day King Artaxerxes gave to Esther all that belonged to Haman the slanderer." This is also symbolic of Yah's people inheriting the earth, which is now claimed by Hasatan. it is noted that in this chapter also, on the 23rd day of Nisan, which is Aviv, that the decree went out to the kingdom that the Yehudim would be treated well. This corresponds to the very day after the Feast of Unleavened Bread, being the 15th from the 22nd of Aviv. At the end of the chapter, it says, in every city and province, wherever the ordinance was published, wherever the proclamation took place, the Yehudim had joy and gladness, feasting and mirth, and many of the Gentiles were circumcised, and became Yehudim for the fear of the Yehudim. So the Gentiles became Yehudim, or part of Israel, just as we were former Goyim before we became part of Israel ourselves. In Esther 9, verses 26 and 27, it says, and established it, and the Yehudim took upon themselves, and upon their seed, and upon those who were joined with them, neither would they on any account behave differently, but these days kept a memorial in every generation, in city, and family, and province. And these days of the Purim shall be kept forever, and their memorial shall not fail in any generation. So note that this was not Yah who ordained the keeping of this feast as one of his appointed times, but it was the Yehudim that began to keep this memorial. I'm not saying it's a sin to observe the day. I'm saying that it was not directed by Yah as a commandment that we must observe. Another nugget of info is that Mordecai and Esther are both descendants of Yaakov, while Haman was descended from Esau. That explains a lot. It has also been said that this Book of Esther is a book that contains no references to Yah or Elohim, but that's patently untrue. Only in the Masoretic text is that the case, but in the Septuagint there are many, many references to him. I suspect that the rabbinical Jews purposely removed them from the text because they contained overtones of the Messiah, who would come just a few hundred years later. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching. Till next time, Shalom.